Hi everyone, and welcome to this video in which I'll answer a specific question, which is why is ear training so hard? Before getting started with my answer, I just want to remind you that our ear training course is available right now, and I suggest you check it out on our website. See the links in the description section. Getting back to the main topic of this video, there are two main reasons why ear training is so hard. The first reason that can cause you to struggle with ear training is practicing exercises that are too difficult for you. And I mean exercises that are not adequate to your current level of skills. Of course, this can be a huge problem because, as it happens in the development of any other complex skills, for example, let's say learning to run. We cannot learn to run before we have learned to walk very well, okay? And the same thing is totally true also in the case of ear training. We need to develop very basic skills, and then we can gradually develop more complex skills starting from that point. It's totally impossible to learn advanced skills at first. So that's a very big thing to keep in mind when practicing ear training. And that's one of the biggest issues related to the interval method, because the interval method unintentionally asks students to perform very difficult tasks since the beginning of their practice. So the interval method doesn't have a real gradual step-by-step approach. And I thoroughly explain everything about what I'm saying in a very specific video that I did a few months ago, where I quote all the scientific studies, all the researches that really show why the interval method is ineffective and why the interval method doesn't have a step-by-step approach. I suggest you check out that video. You can find the link up here or in the description section below. But just in a very few words, the interval method doesn't suggest an effective step-by-step approach because intervals are atonal exercises. When you learn an interval, you pretend to learn just the distance between the two notes without taking into account the function that these two notes assumes inside the tonality, the key, the harmonic context of the musical piece. So you're just trying to develop an atonal perception of the interval, okay? The big issue is that this is a really advanced skill. The first thing we need to do in order to be able to do that is internalizing the sound of the notes in the tonal context. Only after that we can try to face atonal contexts, because that's very clear from scientific studies. Our perception of musical pitch is context dependent. So it doesn't make sense to start out by facing atonal contexts, which are advanced contexts, okay? So the main thing to understand here is to start out with very simple harmonic context, so tonal harmonic context. Because if we don't have a very good internalization of the tonal context, the basic tonal context, we won't have the basic vocabulary, the basic musical vocabulary that allows us to recognize more complex harmonic contexts, such as atonal context, such as, for example, acontextual intervals. So, for example, it will feel almost impossible to even memorize a very simple interval if we have not developed a very basic tonal vocabulary, a basic internalization of the tonal framework first. The more we internalize the simple harmonic context, the major key, for example, the more we will be able to apply those tonal memories in order to recognize and understand also atonal contexts. But then there also are other reasons why you can't practice in a way that's too difficult, too advanced for your current level of skills. So, for example, I see many students practicing in a way that doesn't take into account at all their short-term musical memory capacity. So basically what they do, for example, in a simple melodic dictation, they try to retain, to memorize too many notes at once, okay? And what happens is that If you try to memorize too many notes, your musical memory will be kind of overloaded and you will for sure distort some of those notes. So if you're kind of distorting the pitches of the notes and you're not retaining the correct pitch, it's obviously impossible for you to recognize the notes correctly. And the reason is very simple, because you don't have the correct notes in your head. Another simple example could be when students try to recognize a chord progression by singing all the notes that are inside the chord and trying to find the root note, and maybe they match the third or the fifth of the chord and they don't realize that it's not the root note. So that's just a very simple example, but let's now get on the second main reason why ear training is so hard. The second main reason that can cause you to struggle a lot with ear training is that you might be following an approach that doesn't match how our perception of musical pitch really works and develops. And this is exactly what happens when you approach your training using the interval method. Because again, the interval method suggests an atonal approach. So the interval method doesn't take into account the harmonic context at all, okay? As we've seen, our perception of musical pitch is totally context dependent. And again, you can find a video up here or in the description section below where I thoroughly explain everything about that. And there are lots of scientific studies that show that. So it's not my opinion, it's real fact. If you don't believe that, there are more than 500 people currently subscribed to the course that can testify this. And you can see a lot of comment they are leaving all over the internet on our testimonial page that's available on our website. You can see a link in the description section below. So since the interval method really suggests an atonal approach to recognizing music, to internalizing music and developing ear training skills, it doesn't follow at all the way in which our relative pitch skills naturally develop. And that's a huge problem because people think that they should start developing their ear training skills by recognizing short intervals such as a minor second, and then move on to the major second, and then to the minor third, and then to the major third. That's not how it works. That's not how our relative pitch skills really develops. And starting out to practice your training with those kinds of tasks is the wrong thing to do. And I'm saying that also by my personal direct experience. I tried interval for 10 years without seeing even a little small improvement in return. And the same thing is happening to a lot of other students. Again, I suggest you check them out on our testimonial page. Another example of an approach that doesn't match how our perception of musical pitch works and develops is adopting what I call the trial and error approach. The trial and error approach occurs when a musician helps himself with an instrument and he searches the notes on his instrument till he finds the notes or the chords that matches the one that are in the song. And this doesn't involve any other mental processing than very simple and basic pitch matching skills, where the basic task you are kind of repeating over and over is just identifying when the pitch you are playing on your instrument is played in the song, okay? So for sure, pitch matching is a basic skill in your training that we must have, but this approach won't allow you to get any further than that. Generally speaking, both the interval method and the trial and error approach won't allow you to develop a tonal vocabulary, a musical vocabulary. So these two approaches won't allow you to develop an intuitive connection with music. And this means that you're going to always need a lot of rational effort, a lot of rational thinking in order to recognize chords and melodies by ear and be able to play them on your instrument. or whatever. So this is for sure something that won't allow you to get a lot faster in recognizing melodies, in recognizing chords. If you want to get faster, we need to make a sort of economy of thought, okay? We need to develop a musical vocabulary that will allow you to develop an intuitive connection with music so you can recognize music intuitively just by feeling how a note sounds, how a chord sounds. You can recognize its feeling, and without thinking, you know what chord it is. And that's exactly what great musicians do. They are able to recognize music just by recognizing the sensations that the musical elements have inside the musical piece, inside the key of the musical piece, or the general harmonic context of the musical piece. And that allows them to be able to effortlessly recognize melodies, chords, etc. So if you want to develop those kinds of skills, you need to develop this tonal vocabulary that I'm talking about. And in order to do that, you will need to start out by approaching ear training in a tonal way, okay? Not by focusing on atonal exercises or just by trying to develop your pitch matching skills using the trial and error approach. Lastly, I just want to answer a very simple question that you might have, which is, how can I be sure that I'm practicing ineffectively? The answer is very simple. By practicing effectively, you should be able to see noticeable results on at least a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So if you're not seeing any results in a month or 2 months, then it's very likely that you're practicing ineffectively. And one of these 2 reasons is very likely to be the cause of your struggles. You can also measure whether you're practicing effectively or not by figuring out how much what you're learning is applicable on real music. For example, you want to develop the ability to recognize melodies by ear, and let's say you're practicing intervals in order to develop this skill. You can just take 4 or 5 simple melodies, try to recognize them by ear without memorizing them, then practice for 2 weeks or a month, and then you try to recognize them by ear again. This way you can clearly see and clearly measure whether or not you have improved your ability to recognize melodies by ear in that 2 weeks or that month of practice. This is just another very simple way in which you can measure whether your practice is being effective or not. The last thing I want to say is that musical hearing skills are a very complex topic. Our relative pitch system includes a lot of different skills that interact with each other, and they work together in order to allow us to perform those kinds of skills. So it's a complex system of skills. It's a little bit like learning a language, for example, okay? No one will ever expect to learn a new language from zero in 1 month. That's to say that also if you're using the correct approach, it takes time to develop such a complex system of skills. It can be totally done also if you're starting from zero. That doesn't matter at all, but you need to be patient and you need to work gradually, starting from the basics and then building up from there. Anyway, I hope this video has been helpful to you. Don't forget to subscribe and to leave a like. And if you have some questions, you can ask them in the comment section below. I suggest you check out our website and our courses. See the links in the description section. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Bye.